I'm happy that an audience of this kind is also concerned with growth with equity. In fact, in my budget speech, I quoted Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, his famous speech at Avadi near Chennai in 1955. What I believe were the conditions for inclusive growth, although he did not use the phrase inclusive growth. He asked, and I asked the same question, how can we have growth unless we have growth? How can we spread the benefits of wealth unless we have wealth? So the first order of business is to have growth. Even today, I'm deep with sections of the polity mock at high growth. They accuse me and my government of what should we do? Should we work towards negative growth? Destruction of wealth? Be that as it may, I'm happy that Shankar has growth and then asked pertinent questions about growth with equity. In the first half of the 20th century, no more than 1% a year. In the first 30 years after independence, GDP growth was 5%. In the 80s, and for most about 5.5% a year. Thanks to the foundation, growth moved up a notch as we turned the century. High growth has been witnessed since 98-99. This period there have been two governments in India. The first government, during a span of 6 years, delivered growth of 5.9%. Of course, it ended its tenure with a resounding last year, 2003-04. Since the UPA government came into office, we have completed, or nearly completing, 4 years, and the average for these, I believe, will be between 8.7 and 8.8% a year. We have worked hard to deliver growth. Some, of course, would say that the foundations were laid by the previous government. So be it. I could turn around and say the foundations of the previous government are great and Akbar the Great. The point is, our government has worked hard to deliver high growth. Deliver growth which averages between 8.7% and 8.8% for the 4 years that we will complete. Our goal is to maintain the same batting average. I believe Mr. Gilchrist is here today. In the 5th year of our government, so that we can end this tenure of government with an average of about 8. The question then is, how do we convert this growth into equitable growth or inclusive growth? There are a number of things which a government may want to do, but simply, for example, if you have low tax revenues, what is it you can do? If you have high fiscal deficits, what is it you can do? If you have a high revenue deficit, what is it you can do? I'll come to Shankar's questions presently, but the for converting high growth to better and more inclusive growth is to ensure that you have the revenue, is to ensure that you have the fiscal space to do what you want to do, in both fiscal and monetary management. What has our government done in the last 4 years? In the last 4 years, we've increased the tax to GDP ratio from 9.2% to 12.5% this year, and next year it will be 13%. Giving ourselves so much revenues to do what we have to do, some of the things which Shankar mentioned on health, education. Secondly, our government has been extremely prudent. We inherited a fiscal deficit of 4.5%. This year we have reduced it to 3.1%. And next year we will go below the FRBM target, which coincidentally reflects the Maastricht target. We will be below. We will reach a fiscal deficit of only 2.5%. Likewise, on the revenue side, we inherited a revenue deficit of 3.6%. This year, we have brought, and next year, we will bring it down to 1%. What does this mean? I have more revenues. I have created fiscal space for the government to borrow more, and I have created space for the government and parliament to spend on what they think are desirable objectives. The desirable objectives are, of course, education, health, rural infrastructure, sanitation. You might ask, what is there for industry? Infrastructure for industry is important. It is equally important that we provide physical and social infrastructure to the masses of India. Industry and services are growing and will continue to grow. They will indeed be constrained by poor infrastructure. Every year, telecommunication is infinitely better. The power situation is getting better, but we're not yet. The roads are getting better, the ports are getting better, airports are being built. So physical support, industry and services will get better and better. But we cannot, during that period, neglect India, neglect the vast number of people living in rural India. And therefore, we are garnering the fiscal space that we have created must end to spend more money to put our resources to help the people who deserve those resources. And that means we put more money in education, more money in health, more money in things I mentioned presently. This leads me to the questions which Shankar raised, questions that I raise every day to myself and try to find answers. We have laid the conditions for high growth, and we have laid the preconditions for making this growth more inclusive. What will stand in our way are the very issues that Shankar mentioned, and unless we find answers to these questions, we will not. Let me take these questions one by one. The distribution of wealth is worsening. But why? The share of agriculture is only 3%, and it is shrinking. It is shrinking because industry and services are growing at close to 10%. But the other sector is growing at only about 2.6%. It doesn't require mathematical ability to conclude that this share will shrink. Therefore, give better prices, remunerative prices to our farmers, and to wean as many people as possible away from farming to non-farm activity. As long as 52% of the rural workforce, about 60% of the total population, is dependent on agriculture, and the share of agriculture is shrinking, it's not possible to lessen the inequalities between those dependent on agriculture and those dependent on agriculture. The strategy, therefore, is to give better prices to farmers and to wean people away from farming to non-farm and off-farm activity. The second question is the missing element in our strategy, namely rapid growth of employment-intensive manufacturing. India's economy is dominated by services. 50% is the services sector. 18% is accounted for by agriculture. 27% is accounted for by industry, in which manufacturing is the dominant component. Manufacturing is not throwing up the kind of numbers of jobs that we desire because capital productivity, labor productivity gains, as well as technology. Technology is shrinking the number of jobs. Productivity of capital and the increased productivity of labor, which has been reasonably well documented, is ensured manufacturing can grow even when the labor force does not grow correspondingly. India virtually missed the Industrial Revolution. If we had enjoyed the benefits, if India had rapidly industrialized in the first half of the 20th century and immediately after independence, like the public sector, we might have had more jobs in manufacturing. The public sector was over, the private sector was constrained by licenses and controls. So manufacturing did not grow. Today, a conscious effort to expand manufacturing, we find that technology and labor productivity is jobs. That is something which we have to accept as a given. We'll have to find jobs elsewhere. We'll find jobs in other sectors like mining. We have to find jobs in service. In fact, given the rapid increases in labor productivity and capital productivity, it's likely that manufacturing will throw up many, many more jobs. We have to look for job creation in the services sector. We look for job creation in those parts of industry where there is still scope for more jobs. The third question that Shankar raised was inter-regional and interstate inequalities. This is sad but true. Historically, the states have tended to be outward looking. Maharashtra, Gujarat, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and now even Orissa, Karnataka. They're outward looking states. All over the world we find Hindu states are inward looking. You can find that even in the United States. States which are coastal states states which have harbors, which have ports, are outward looking. There is emigration, there is immigration, there is movement of labor. But states which are landlocked, in the US it would be the Midwest, states which are landlocked tend to be inward looking and conservative. One of the reasons why you do not find too many entrepreneurs in these states. However, another kind of entrepreneurship flourished in these states, political entrepreneurship. Consequently, governance has suffered. There are regional inequalities, but they are clearly related to the quality of governance. In the better growing, faster growing states is definitely superior to the quality of governance. But that is changing. I can see winds of change blowing in Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, now in Chhattisgarh. Winds of change are blowing. People are beginning to demand, why are we not having better governments? Why is our government not delivering? Because of the complex situation created by political parties, ideologies, castes, lack of land reforms, lack of the spread of education, the landlocked states have suffered. They have not gained as much as the other states through the last 17 years of reforms. But I think things are changing. Ultimately, it is the people who must take the responsibility for putting in place good governance. The people of a state have to elect good governors. Why do people repeatedly elect leaders who've been found to be wanting, found to be inefficient, found to be inept, and found to be corrupt? You can give a political party, a political leader, say one chance, and maybe a second chance if he or she is truly contrite. But why a third chance and a fourth chance? If a political party has not delivered after several years, or a political leader has not delivered after several years in office, why do the people elect them again and again and again? Ultimately, the people must take responsibility for the quality of government. And the final question is state's role in moderating inequalities. This, of course, is the most important question. How much should the state intervene? I have no quarrel with the proposition that the state must intervene where intervention is necessary. In fact, I'll go a step further. The state must lean, if it leans at all, it must lean in favor of the poor. It must lean in favor of the disadvantaged. It must lean in favor of those sections of society which have been neglected through years. It must lean in favor of those sections of the people who have been denied opportunities for centuries. But the state that we are talking about is a state that is fair, that is honest, that is honorable, but a state that is corrupt or rapacious or predatory. Is it not much better that the state remains neutral rather than leans in favor of people? A predatory state or a rapacious state, in the name of leaning in favor of the poor and the disadvantaged, likely push them into misery. Unless the instruments of government become better, I would rather that the state intervene only where today intervention is necessary in some areas like education, road connectivity, rail connectivity, sanitation, and perhaps housing for the poor. If the uses its resources, human and financial, in these areas, it is likely to yield results. But in the name of intervention, if the state intervenes in otherwise pure commercial activity, I'm afraid that that kind of intervention is not going to reduce inequalities. In fact, that kind of intervention is likely to make the state bigger and more bloated and rapacious and predatory and therefore harmful. So we must identify the areas where state intervention is necessary in a given context. Given where state intervention necessary, and if the context requires state intervention, the state must. Unfortunately, what is happening is state governments are responsibilities in favor of the central government. What does the Constitution of India say? The Constitution of India squarely places the right and the responsibility for a number of areas upon state governments, and this includes primary education, health, drinking water, sanitation. All these are essentially the responsibility of state government. But over the last 10 years, we've found that the states have willingly invited the center. They want the center to design programs to deliver education, healthcare, and other services. Do so, obviously, for good reason, so that they can get more money from the center, so that the center will bear the responsibility in these programs. I can understand the advantages of receiving funds from the center, but the kind of intervention becomes a one-size-fits-all intervention which doesn't work in most parts of India. I would much rather that the center provide the funds and the states take on the responsibility for dealing with matters of the states. These questions are with us today, and these questions will remain with us for some more years. But what is important is, are we addressing these questions sincerely, honestly, and with determination? I believe we are, although I consider we can summon greater determination and bring to our task greater efficiency. If we distribute vast quantities of distribution system, the finding is 36% of the food grains do not reach the poor. We have laid out the largest guaranteed wage employment program, the safety net of the poor. The finding is that the unwillingness to use technology to monitor these programs. There are pockets in India where this program is not reaching the guaranteed wage to the very poor. We have the largest school lunch program in the world. 130 children eat a school lunch. The finding is that because we are unwilling to entrust responsibility for that meal being prepared under community supervision in the village, the quality of the food and the quantity of food in many cases leaves much to be desired. We have a very large road building program, and I'm not talking only of highways, I'm talking about the rural roads program to connect villages. The finding is many of the roads are poor quality, that they have to be relaid every 5 years. The road vanishes after 3 or 4 years. It's important that the quality of governance improves. We are on the right path. The road direction, the objectives and goals are clear, but what has to be improved in this country? You and I must elect better governors. You and I must put in place better governments. You and I must hold governments accountable. You and I must reward good governance and, this is important, punish bad governance. We are the kindest people in the world. We reward governance occasionally. We rarely punish bad governance. If we, as a nation, reward and punish bad governance, you will find that India delivers better inclusive growth in the next 20 years. We have found the preconditions for growth. We know the preconditions for inclusion. Focus on these preconditions and ensure that these preconditions are met. Thank you.